Ben had spent weeks planning the moment, convinced that proposing to Emily would be the start of the rest of their lives. He knelt under the warm glow of the restaurant lights, holding out a 1-carat diamond ring he had saved for over a year to buy. Emily gasped, covered her mouth, and said yes, as tears streamed down her face. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But perfection didn't last long. By the next morning, Emily's smile had faded, replaced by a strange, sharp irritation. She stared at the ring with narrowed eyes, turning it under the light as if hunting for flaws. Then came the first post on her social media, a cryptic line about deserving more than bare minimum effort. Ben didn't understand it yet, but that post was the first crack. Within hours, the internet would witness the unraveling of their future. Emily's shift in attitude didn't happen quietly. It crashed into Ben's life like a storm he didn't see coming. The first sign came 2 days after the proposal, when she held the ring up in the kitchen and sighed dramatically. "It's cute," she said, stretching the word as if it were an insult wrapped in politeness. Ben tried to laugh it off, assuming she was joking, but the look on her face told him it wasn't a joke at all. By the end of that week, she had made 3 separate comments about her friends' engagement rings, each time mentioning carat sizes as though they were badges of honor. One friend had a 2-carat oval. Another had a halo design, far more elegant. Emily repeated these details obsessively, like she was rehearsing lines she hoped Ben would overhear. And he did. Every one of them. Emily didn't disappear quietly after the breakup. If anything, she became louder, angrier, and more determined to control the narrative. Within hours of Ben leaving, she had blocked him on every platform, only to unlock everything the next day so she could post about him indirectly. The first post read, "Imagine getting dumped by a man who begged you to stay." Pathetic. Anyone who knew Ben understood that wasn't true, but many people didn't know him well enough to question it. She kept the engagement ring, too. Ben had asked for it back, calmly and respectfully, but she refused. "It was a gift," she declared. "You don't get to take it back just because you can't handle a real woman." It didn't matter that the law in their state clearly defined it as a conditional gift tied to marriage. Emily didn't care about legalities. She cared about winning. And she wanted an audience. Emily began portraying herself as a victim of a controlling partner. She claimed Ben was cheap, insecure, and incapable of providing the lifestyle she had earned. She even posted a TikTok accusing him of monitoring her phone, something that never happened. The comments flooded in with sympathy for her and hatred for Ben. She soaked it in like fuel. Then, almost as if she needed a prop to prove she had upgraded, Emily started dating Tyler, a coworker who had flirted with her for months. She posted their first picture together, only a week after the breakup. The caption was a dagger: "Real men don't hand out discount rings." In the photo, she flashed the engagement ring Ben had given her, holding it between 2 fingers like it was a trinket she had outgrown. Tyler looked uncomfortable, but Emily didn't care. For her, the point wasn't Tyler. The point was spite. But the cracks began showing quickly. Tyler wasn't the glamorous upgrade she tried to portray. He constantly borrowed money, made excuses about delayed paychecks, and disappeared for hours without texting her back. Emily brushed off all the red flags and continued posting about her better life, but her followers started noticing inconsistencies. Some comments questioned why she was still wearing the ring from her so-called terrible ex. Others asked why Tyler never appeared outside photos she staged. Meanwhile, Ben was trying to move on, but the fallout from Emily's smear campaign followed him everywhere. Mutual friends messaged him asking if the rumors were true. Even coworkers heard about Emily's posts. He kept his replies simple: "It's not true, but I'm not engaging." Still, the damage stung, especially coming from someone he once thought he'd spend forever with. Finally, after discovering that Emily had told people he refused to let her keep the ring because he was broke. Ben reached his limit. He contacted a lawyer, hopping to avoid a fight but ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. When Emily received the letter threatening potential legal action, her confidence cracked for the first time. Suddenly, her arrogance deflated into panic. She messaged him, "Fine. Take your stupid ring." But even then, she didn't deliver it with grace. She left it in a cheap plastic bag on his porch, accompanied by a note that read, "This is all you'll ever be worth." Ben picked it up, shook his head, and realized something important. Emily hadn't just shown her true self during the breakup. She'd been showing it all along. He had just refused to see it. When Ben finally held the engagement ring again, he felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that the legal battle was over before it truly began. Disappointment that something once meant to symbolize love had turned into a weapon used against him. He placed the ring back into its small velvet box and slid it into a drawer, unsure if he would ever want to open it again. Life slowly returned to normal. Ben focused on work, on rebuilding friendships strained by rumors, and on rediscovering who he was outside of Emily's shadow. For weeks he avoided dating entirely, wanting space to breathe. Then, by chance, he met Sophie. She walked into his life on a quiet Saturday afternoon at a local bookstore. Ben was standing in the history aisle when he heard someone humming softly. When he turned, Sophie was there, brows knit as she tried to reach a book on the upper shelf. Ben stepped in to help, and she laughed at herself as if the moment were something charming rather than embarrassing. That laugh stayed with him long after they parted. They ran into each other again, 2 days later at a cafe nearby. This time Sophie approached him first, smiling as though fate had played a harmless joke. They talked for nearly an hour, discovering quickly that conversation came easily, naturally, without the pressure Ben had grown used to. Sophie didn't care about status symbols or polished appearances. She didn't obsess over social media. Her account had only a handful of photos, all of them candid and unfiltered. She valued quiet moments, honest conversations, and simple joys. For Ben, it felt like stepping out of a storm into a gentle, steady light. Weeks turned into months, and their bond deepened. Sophie never asked about expensive gifts or extravagant dates. She enjoyed long walks, cooking together, and laughing at their mutual lack of dancing skills when a favorite song came on. Ben often found himself wondering how something so peaceful could exist after so much chaos. He didn't question it, he just cherished it. Eventually, the subject of marriage surfaced naturally during one of their late-night talks. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people imagining a future together. That night, when Sophie fell asleep beside him, Ben quietly retrieved the ring box from his drawer. He opened it, staring at the diamond that had once symbolized heartache. Now, looking at it with Sophie in mind, it felt different. It felt right. He proposed a week later during a simple picnic by the lake. No audience. No staged photos. Just the two of them, under the fading evening light. When Ben opened the ring box, he hesitated, explaining softly that the ring had belonged to another chapter of his life. Sophie listened without judgment. Then she reached out, touched his hand, and said, "It's not about where it came from. It's about who's giving it to me now." Ben slipped the ring onto her finger, and she smiled with a quiet joy that melted every remaining trace of Emily from his heart. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope not as a fragile wish, but as a solid truth. He was finally with someone who valued the meaning behind the ring more than the carat size. Emily found out about Ben's engagement faster than he expected. All it took was one tagged photo from a friend at the lake and a short caption from Sophie that read, "Forever starts today." Within minutes, Emily began posting cryptic messages that dripped with bitterness. At first, they were subtle, thinly veiled comments about men who recycle relationships and rings. But as the hours passed, her tone shifted from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. She uploaded a TikTok in which she stared dramatically into the camera, mouthing the words to a trending audio about dodging a bullet. The caption read, "When your ex proposes with the same ring he tried to force on you." The post exploded instantly. People who had followed her breakup saga jumped in with sympathy and outrage. But the comments began to divide when some users questioned why she still had photos of the ring saved on her phone. Emily ignored the questions and doubled down. Soon she was posting multiple times a day. One story read, "Imagine being so cheap you can't even buy your new fiancé her own ring." Another asked, "What kind of woman accepts leftovers?" Her anger wasn't subtle anymore. It was consuming. Then came the phone call from Linda, her mother. Ben was surprised to see her name flash on his screen, but answered out of politeness. Linda's voice shook as she pleaded with him not to use the ring for Sophie. She insisted it was humiliating for Emily and begged him to at least consider exchanging it so Emily wouldn't look bad. Ben listened in stunned silence as Linda offered to pay whatever difference was needed. He declined calmly, saying the ring belonged to him and Sophie loved it as it was. Linda tried again, more desperately this time, but Ben ended the call gently. He knew no explanation would satisfy them. While Emily raged online, her friends began attacking Sophie through comments and private messages. They flooded her social media with accusations, calling her unclassy for accepting another woman's ring and implying she was naive. Sophie read every message, but didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she posted a single line on her page, "What others throw away, someone else will cherish." The post wasn't spiteful, just honest, and it was enough to silence most of the noise. As Emily's attempts to smear them intensified, Sophie remained steady. She didn't match Emily's rage with rage of her own. She simply supported Ben, reassured him, and refused to let toxicity poison their happiness. Ben watched her handle the chaos with grace he hadn't known was possible. It made him even more certain that he had chosen the right person. Meanwhile, Emily's frustration grew unbearable. She wasn't just angry that Ben had moved on. She was furious that he had found happiness without her. The idea that the ring she once mocked was now cherished by another woman felt like a personal attack. Her posts became more chaotic, her stories longer, her tone increasingly frantic. Yet no matter how much noise she created, it didn't reach Ben the way she hoped. For the first time, Emily was realizing something she had never considered before. Her power over Ben, whatever illusion of control she'd once believed she had, was gone. Completely. Irreversibly. Emily's resentment didn't fade. It intensified, driving her into a spiral of denial and reinvention. She began curating a new version of the past, one where she was the strong, independent woman who had walked away from Ben, not the other way around. Her first step in rewriting history was posting old engagement photos. She captioned them, "I said no because I refused to settle." Never shrink yourself just to make someone else comfortable. The narrative was bold, dramatic, and entirely false. But the lie didn't last long. The photographer who shot their engagement photos happened to see the post. She commented publicly, "That's strange. You said yes, and you booked me for wedding photos 2 weeks later." The comment was polite but devastating. It spread quickly as people took screenshots before Emily could delete it. Then came the blow from Tyler. Their relationship had been rocky from the start, but Emily had convinced herself she could mold him into the image she needed. When he finally broke things off, citing stress, money issues, and Emily's constant comparisons to Ben, he didn't leave quietly. He posted his own version of the truth on social media. He revealed how Emily had spent weeks obsessing over a 3-carat ring minimum. He described her constant bragging, her fixation on outshining her friends, and her unhealthy obsession with appearances. He even admitted that Emily used him as proof that she had upgraded, though she never stopped talking about Ben. People began piecing the puzzle together. The sympathy Emily once received started to evaporate. Some of her followers called her out. Others quietly unfollowed. But Emily refused to stop. Instead, she escalated further, claiming Tyler was lying out of bitterness. Yet the more she tried to defend herself, the more tangled and contradictory her story became. Amid the chaos, Linda once again reached out to Ben. This time, her voice carried exhaustion instead of urgency. She admitted that Emily wasn't coping well and begged Ben to consider talking to her. Just one conversation, she insisted, so she can have closure. When Ben declined, Linda shifted tactics, suggesting he might give Emily another chance since she's grown a lot. Ben thanked her for calling but refused. Not unkindly, not angrily, just firmly. He had closed that chapter, and nothing Linda said could reopen it. Emily's final attempt at reclaiming control was a long, emotional post-claiming she had walked away from a toxic relationship with a man who never truly loved her. She framed herself as a survivor of emotional neglect. She insisted she had turned down the proposal because she knew she deserved better. But the cracks in her story were already visible. Screenshots from her earlier posts resurfaced. Comments from the photographer and Tyler circulated widely. People who had once defended her now questioned everything she'd said. Through it all, Ben stayed silent. Sophie stayed calm. Their quiet happiness stood in sharp contrast to Emily's public unraveling. And for the first time, Emily was forced to confront something she'd never expected. Not only had she lost Ben, but she had also lost the narrative she'd tried so desperately to control. Ben and Sophie chose a small wedding, just close friends, family, and a quiet venue surrounded by trees. There were no extravagant decorations, no dramatic entrances, no showy displays meant to impress the world. Everything felt warm, personal, and intentional, exactly the opposite of the life Ben once had with Emily. On the morning of the wedding, Sophie stood in front of a mirror adjusting her simple lace dress, feeling calm and content. Ben, waiting outside the ceremony hall, felt the kind of peace he had once believed he'd never experience again. But peace didn't stop the storm that was already on its way. Just minutes before the ceremony began, a hush swept through the crowd as someone unexpected walked in. Emily, wearing a floor-length white gown that sparkled under the lights. It was the kind of entrance designed to steal attention, and for a moment, she succeeded. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A few guests exchanged shocked glances. Emily strutted down the aisle, not to congratulate, not to sit quietly in the back, but to make sure everyone saw her. She lifted her chin like she belonged there, like this was her moment as much as theirs. Ben froze when he saw her, disbelief tightening his chest. Sophie, however, remained composed. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped toward Emily with quiet confidence. Emily faked a smile, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I just came to wish you luck," she said, loud enough for guests to hear. "But I thought you should know that ring looks familiar. Some brides prefer something new, you know." A few guests murmured uncomfortably. Emily smirked, believing she had landed a blow. Sophie didn't flinch. She looked Emily straight in the eyes. "The ring is part of Ben's story," she said softly. "And now it's part of mine. Some of us care about meaning, not price tags." Her tone wasn't mocking, it was simply honest. The simplicity of her words hit harder than any insult could. Emily's face crumpled. It was the first time she looked genuinely small. She opened her mouth to argue, but the officiant firmly intervened, asking her to leave if she couldn't respect the ceremony. When Emily hesitated, security stepped forward to escort her out. On her way toward the exit, she threw one last glare over her shoulder, but it lacked the fire she once carried. It was the look of someone realizing she had no more power in the room. After she was gone, the ceremony continued. Sophie walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her smile brighter than the morning sun. Ben's eyes watered as he watched her approach, and every trace of Emily faded into insignificance. They exchanged vows handwritten on small cards, promising softness, honesty, and loyalty. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was warm and genuine. There was no drama left, only joy. Later that night, while photos from the wedding circulated among friends, Emily returned to social media with a long, philosophical post about rising above the past. She framed herself once again as the misunderstood heroine of her own story. But the world had grown tired of her narrative. Her post received only a fraction of the attention she once commanded. Meanwhile, Sophie posted a single picture. Her hand intertwined with Ben's, the engagement ring shining gently under soft evening lights. No captions, no explanations, no pettiness. Just happiness. Real, quiet happiness that didn't need to shout to be heard. Ben and Sophie spent their honeymoon in a small coastal town, far from noise, far from drama, and far from anyone who still cared about the chaos Emily had created. They woke up to the sound of waves, cooked breakfast together, and talked about the future with an ease that felt like breathing. For the first time in years, Ben felt completely unburdened. There were no accusations, no hidden resentments, no fear of being judged for not being enough. But the peace didn't stop Emily's mother, Linda, from making one last desperate attempt. She called Sophie privately and offered her $20,000 to walk away from Ben. Sophie listened, not offended, just saddened that someone still believed love could be bought. She declined with gentle firmness, saying, "I'm not leaving the man I love for any amount of money." When Sophie told Ben about the call, he wasn't angry, just grateful. He held her hand a little tighter that night, realizing how lucky he was. Emily, meanwhile, continued posting vague messages about healing and new beginnings, but the world had moved on. Ben had too. He understood now that the value of a ring wasn't determined by its size, but by the heart that chose to cherish it.